railway station.
Bear with me. At this point in time, the enemy's demand on humans takes the form of a dilemma. Either complete abstinence or unmitigated monogamy. Ever since our father's first great victory, we have rendered the former very difficult to them. The latter, for the last few centuries, we have been closing up as a means of escape.
Well, how have we accomplished such a thing?
Here. Notice the wares of this bookseller. You see the titles? Romance, passion, intrigues. We have used poets and novelists to persuade the humans that a curious and usually short-lived experience which they call being in love is the only respectable ground for marriage, that marriage can and ought to render this excitement permanent, and that a marriage which does not do so is no longer binding. This idea is our parody of an idea that came from the enemy.
How amusing.
Yes. The whole philosophy of hell rests on the recognition of the axiom that one thing is not another thing, and especially that oneself is not another self. My good is my good, and your good is yours. What one gains, another loses. Even an inanimate object is what it is by excluding all other objects from the space it occupies. If it expands, it does so by thrusting other objects aside or by absorbing them. A self does the same. With beasts, the absorption takes the form of eating. For us, it means the sucking of will and freedom out of a weaker self into a stronger. To be means to be in competition.
These are basic facts.
To us, yes. Now, the enemy's philosophy is nothing more or less than one continued attempt to evade this very obvious truth. He aims at a contradiction. Things are to be many, yet somehow also one. The good of oneself is to be the good of another. This impossibility he calls love. And this same monotonous panacea can be detected under all he does, and even all he is or claims to be. Thus he is not content, even himself, to be a sheer arithmetical unity. He claims to be three as well as one, in order that this nonsense about love may find a foothold in his own nature. At the other end of the scale, he introduces into matter that obscene invention, the organism, in which the parts are perverted from their natural destiny of competition and made to cooperate.
I'm sorry, Uncle, but I don't understand what this has to do with sex.
The enemy's real motive for fixing on sex as the method of reproduction amongst humans is only too apparent from the use he has made of it. Sex might have been, from our point of view, quite innocent. It might have been merely one more mode in which a stronger self preyed upon a weaker, as it is, indeed, among the spiders, where the bride concludes her nuptials by eating her groom.
I enjoy that part.
But in the humans, the enemy has gratuitously connected affection between the parties with sexual desire. He has also made the offspring dependent on the parents and given the parents an impulse to support it, thus producing the family, which is like the organism, only worse, where the members are more distinct, yet also united in a more conscious and responsible way. The whole thing, in fact, turns out to be simply one more device for dragging in love. Now comes the joke. The enemy described a married couple as one flesh. He did not say a happily married couple or a couple who married because they were in love, but you can make the humans ignore that. You can also make them forget that the man they call Saint Paul did not confine it to married couples. Mere copulation for him makes one flesh.
Right, and the point is?
The point. Isn't it obvious? You can get the humans to accept as rhetorical eulogies of being in love what were in fact plain descriptions of the real significance of sexual intercourse. The truth is, Wherever a man lies with a woman, there, whether they like it or not, a transcendental relation is set up between them. This relation must be eternally enjoyed or eternally endured.
Right.
From the true statement that this transcendental relation was intended to produce affection and the family, humans can be made to infer the false belief that the blend of affection, fear, and desire, which they call being in love, is the only thing that makes marriage either happy or holy. The error is easy to produce because being in love does very often in Western Europe precede marriages which are made in obedience to the enemy's designs. That is, with the intention of fidelity, fertility, and goodwill. Just as religious emotion very often, but not always, attends conversion. In other words, the humans are to be encouraged to regard as the basis for marriage a highly colored and distorted version of something the enemy really promises as its result.
I see. Sort of. But what exactly is the advantage of this effort?
There are two advantages. In the first place, humans who have not the gift of self-control can be deterred from seeking marriage as a solution because they do not find themselves in love. And thanks to us, the idea of marrying with any other motive seems to them low and cynical.
Do they really believe that?
They do. They regard the intention of loyalty to a partnership for mutual help, for the preservation of chastity, and for the transmission of life as something lower than a storm of emotion. In the second place, any sexual infatuation, whatever, so long as it intends marriage, will be regarded as love. And love will be held to excuse a man from all the guilt and to protect him from all the consequences of marrying a heathen, a fool, or a wanton.
But this business of the humans being in love, is that desirable or not?
Really, Wormwood, that is the sort of question one expects them to ask. Leave them to discuss whether love or patriotism or celibacy or candles on altars or teetotalism or education are good or bad. Can't you see? There is no answer.
Oh.
Nothing matters at all except the tendency of a given state of mind in given circumstances to move a particular patient at a particular moment nearer to the enemy or nearer to us. Though there are advantages in making the patient decide that love is good or bad.
Oh? How so?
Well, if he is an arrogant man with a contempt for the body really based on delicacy, but mistaken by him for purity, and one who takes pleasure in flouting what most of his fellows approve, by all means, let him decide against love. Instill into him an overweening asceticism, and then, when you have separated his sexuality from all that might humanize it, weigh in on him with it in a much more brutal and cynical form. If, on the other hand, he is an emotional, gullible man, feed him on minor poets and fifth-rate novelists of the old school until you have made him believe that love is both irresistible and somehow intrinsically meritorious. This belief is not much help, I grant you, in producing casual unchastity, but it is an incomparable recipe for prolonged, noble, romantic, tragic adulteries that end, if all goes well, in murders and suicides. Failing that, it can be used to steer the patient into a useful marriage.
Oh?
Well, there must be several young women in your patient's neighborhood who would render the Christian life intensely difficult to him if only you could persuade him to marry one of them. Please send me a report on this.
Yes, sir.
In the meantime, get it quite clear in your own mind that this state of falling in love is not itself necessarily favorable either to us or to the other side. It is simply an occasion which we and the enemy are both trying to exploit. Like most of the other things which humans are excited about, such as health and sickness, age and youth, or war and peace, it is, from the point of view of the spiritual life, mainly raw material. Got it?
Yes, Uncle. Uncle,
What now, Wormwood?
may we go back to a point you made earlier? I'd like to be clear, if only for the record.
What?
I believe you've said that all selves are by their very nature in competition.
Yes.
And therefore the enemy's idea of love is a contradiction in terms.
Yes!
And that the enemy loves the human vermin and really desires their freedom and continued existence. Is that what you said? I want to understand, to be clear, for when I repeat all this later.
Repeat?
At your trial for heresy.
Heresy? Oh, I see a point, yes. Yes. Now, dear nephew, I have assumed all along that these conversations were entirely confidential between us.
Have you?
Yes, and it would be wrong to repeat anything I've said, since, taken out of context, one might see the appearance of heresy, which, of course, is entirely wrong.
Is it?
Of course it is. And, by the way, I hope you understood, too, that my apparently uncomplimentary references to Slubgob were purely jocular. I really had the highest respect for the old devil.
Jocular.
And, of course, some things I said about not shielding you from the authorities were not seriously meant. You can trust me to look after your interests.
I'm sure I can.
The truth is, I slipped by mere carelessness into saying that the enemy really loves the humans, and that, of course, is an impossibility. He is one being. They are distinct from him. Their good cannot be his. All his talk about love must be a disguise for something else. He must have a real motive for creating them and taking so much trouble about them.
Of course.
The reason one comes to talk as if he really had this impossible love is our utter failure to find out that real motive. What does he stand to make out of them? That is the insoluble question.
Is it?
This very problem was the chief cause of our father's quarrel with the enemy. When the creation of man was first at issue, and when, even at that stage, the enemy freely confessed that he foresaw a certain episode about a cross, our father very naturally sought an interview and asked for an explanation.
And?
The enemy gave no reply except to produce the cock and bull story about disinterested love, which he has been circulating ever since. This, our father, naturally could not accept. He implored the enemy to lay his cards on the table and gave him every opportunity. He admitted that he felt a real anxiety to know the secret. The enemy replied, "I wish with all my heart that you did." It was, I imagine, at this stage in the interview that our father's disgust at such an unprovoked lack of confidence caused him to remove himself an infinite distance from the presence with a suddenness which has given rise to the ridiculous story from the enemy's camp that he was forcibly thrown out of heaven. Since then, we have begun to see why our oppressor was so secretive. His throne depends on the secret. Members of his faction have frequently admitted that if we ever came to understand what he means by love, the war would be over and we should re-enter heaven. And there lies the great task. Oh, we know that he cannot really love. Nobody can. Doesn't make sense.
If I may be so bold, why has no one found out what he's really up to?
Hypothesis after hypothesis has been tried, but to no avail. Yet we must never lose hope. More and more complicated theories, fuller and fuller collections of data, richer rewards for researchers who make progress, more and more terrible punishments for those who fail. All this, pursued and accelerated to the very end of time, cannot surely fail to succeed. Is that enough for you, dear nephew?
Yes, Uncle.
Good. And, about the other matter, the so-called, heresy.
Think nothing of it, Uncle.
Sir,
What now, Toadpipe?
I called for you on the hotline, Sir Wormwood.
He's really going to make the most of it, isn't he?
Sir?
Nothing. Nothing. Put him through.
Yes, sir.
My dear Wormwood, what may I do for you?
The enemy has forcibly put an end to my direct attacks on my patient's chastity.
Has he? Well, he always does in the end. You really ought to have stopped before you reached that stage.
I suppose so, but it was awfully fun while it was working.
You young tempters often get carried away with your own amusement. So, I would imagine as things are, your man has now discovered that these attacks don't last forever.
He has.
That's that. It's unfortunate. The belief of these ignorant humans that there is no hope of getting rid of us except by yielding is our best weapon, and now you cannot use it again.
What am I to do?
I suppose you've been trying to persuade him that chastity is unhealthy.
I have. It didn't help.
Well, I haven't yet got a report from you on young women in the neighborhood. I should like it at once, for if we can't use his sexuality to make him unchaste, we must try to use it for the promotion of a desirable marriage. Well, desirable to us, miserable to him.
Right, but what should I do in the meantime?
We must consider what type of woman, I mean the physical type, he should be encouraged to fall in love with, if falling in love is the best that we can manage. Take note.
Hold on. Ready?
In a rough and ready way, of course, this question is decided for us by spirits far deeper down in the lowerarchy than you and I.
Oh? Well, I haven't heard about that.
It is the business of these great masters to produce in every age a general misdirection which may be called sexual taste. This they do by working through the small circle of popular artists, dressmakers, actresses, and advertisers who determine the fashionable type. Their aim is to guide each sex away from those members of the other with whom spiritually helpful, happy, and fertile marriages are most likely. Thus we have now for many centuries triumphed over nature to the extent of making certain secondary characteristics of the male disagreeable to nearly all the females, and there is more in that than you might suppose. As regard the male taste, we have varied a good deal. At one time, we have directed it to the statuesque and aristocratic type of beauty, mixing men's vanity with their desires and encouraging the race to breed chiefly from the most arrogant and prodigal women. At another time, we have selected an exaggeratedly feminine type, faint and languishing, so that folly and cowardice and all the general falseness and littleness of mind which go with them shall be at a premium. At present, we are on the tack in which we teach men to like women whose bodies are scarcely distinguishable from those of boys. Since this is a kind of beauty even more transitory than most, we thus aggravate the female's chronic horror of growing old, with many excellent results, and render her less willing and less able to bear children. And that is not all. Are you getting this?
Yes, Uncle.
We have engineered a great increase in the license which society permits with the representation of the apparent nude in art and its exhibition on the stage and the beach. It is all a fake, of course. The figures in popular art are falsely drawn. The real women in bathing suits or tights are actually pinched in and propped up to make them appear firmer and more slender and more boyish than nature allows a full-grown woman to be. Yet at the same time, the modern world is taught to believe that it is being frank and healthy and getting back to nature to look at such misrepresentations. As a result, we are more and more directing the desires of men to something which does not exist, making the role of the eye in sexuality more and more important, while at the same time making its demands more and more impossible. What follows can be easily forecast, and that is the general strategy of the moment.
It is an exceptional strategy.
It is exceptional because within that framework you will still find it possible to encourage your patient's desires in one of two directions. You will find, if you look carefully into any human's heart, that he is haunted by at least two imaginary women, a terrestrial and an infernal Venus, and that his desire differs qualitatively according to its object.
Terrestrial and infernal Venus?
The terrestrial Venus is one type for which his desire is such as to be naturally amenable to the enemy, readily mixed with charity, readily obedient to marriage, colored all through with that golden light of reverence and naturalness which we detest. The other type, the infernal Venus, he desires brutally, and desires to desire brutally. It is a type best used to draw him away from marriage altogether, but which, even within marriage, he would tend to treat as a slave, an idol, or an accomplice.
I see.
His love for the first might involve what the enemy calls evil, but only accidentally. The man would wish that she was not someone else's wife and be sorry that he could not love her lawfully. But in the second type, the felt evil is what he wants. It is that tang in the flavor which he is after. In the face, it is the visible animality, or sulkiness, or craft, or cruelty which he likes. And in the body, something quite different from what he ordinarily calls beauty. Something he may even, in a sane hour, describe as ugliness, but which, by our art, can be made to play on the raw nerve of his private obsession. The real use of the infernal Venus is no doubt as prostitute or mistress.
But my patient is a Christian.
That is not a problem if he has been well trained in all that nonsense about irresistible and all-excusing love. He can often be induced to marry her, and that is very well worth bringing about. You will have failed as regards fornication and solitary vice, but there are other and more indirect methods of using a man's sexuality to his undoing. And, by the way, they are not only efficient, but delightful. The unhappiness produced is of a very lasting and exquisite kind. Did you get all that?
Every word, Uncle. I will treat it as gospel.
Mind your language. I'll expect a full report of your progress imminently. Wormwood,
Uncle,
what are you doing here?
I was on my way to see you.
You are lying, of course?
Of course. I had another appointment.
I see. What are you up to?
Nothing, Uncle. But since we've met up, I would like to speak with you about my patient.
All right. Come into my office.
And that is my approach, to use this time of sexual temptation to push his increased irritability.
Yes, I see. Yes, well, that is a good subordinate attack. It may even become your main attack as long as he thinks it is the subordinate one.
Well, exactly.
But here, as in everything else, the way must be prepared for your moral assault by darkening his intellect.
In what way?
Men are not angered by mere misfortune, but by misfortune conceived as injury. And that sense of injury depends on the feeling that a legitimate claim has been denied. The more claims on his life, therefore, that your patient can be induced to make, the more often he will feel injured, and as a result, ill-tempered.
Right. For example?
No doubt you have noticed that nothing throws him into a passion so easily as to find a tract of time, which he reckoned on having at his own disposal, unexpectedly taken away from him.
Yes, he has to receive an unexpected visitor when he looked forward to a quiet evening, or the friend's talkative wife turns up when he looked forward to time alone with the friend. Those sorts of things throw him out of gear.
Presumably, he is not yet so uncharitable or slothful that these small demands on his courtesy are in themselves too much for it.
No, but they still anger him, because he thinks of his time as his own, and he feels that it's being stolen.
So you must therefore zealously guard in his mind the curious assumption, my time is my own. Let him have the feeling that he starts each day as the lawful possessor of 24 hours. Let him feel as a grievous burden that portion of his time which he has to give over to his employers, and as a generous donation that further time which he allows to his religious duties. But what he must never be permitted to doubt is that the total from which these deductions have been made was, in some mysterious sense, his own personal birthright.
That's a bit tricky.
Indeed, it's a delicate task. The assumption which you want him to go on making is so absurd, if it is ever questioned, even we cannot find a shred of argument in its defense. The man can neither make nor retain one moment of time. It all comes as a pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and moon as his servants.
I dare say these humans think they can.
He is also, in theory, committed to a total service of the enemy. And if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded that total service for even one day, he would not refuse. Though he would be greatly relieved if that one day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of say, a foolish woman, and he would be relieved almost to the pitch of disappointment if, for 1/2 hour in that day, the enemy said, "Now, you may go and amuse yourself." Now, if he thinks about his assumption for a moment, even he is bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day.
Well, perhaps I should draw attention to that.
What? No. That's the last thing I mean you to do. Your task is purely negative. Don't let his thoughts come anywhere near it. Wrap a darkness about it, and in the center of that darkness, let his sense of ownership in time lie silent, uninspected, and operative.
Then I should encourage him in his sense of ownership.
Now you're getting the idea. Right. You see, the humans are always putting up claims to ownership which sound equally funny in heaven and in hell. And we must keep them doing so. For example, much of the modern resistance to chastity comes from men's belief that they own their bodies.
Fools.
It is as if a royal child whom his father has placed for love's sake in titular command of some great province under the real rule of wise counselors should come to fancy he really owns the cities, the forests, and the corn in the same way that he owns the bricks on the nursery floor.
So it's a particular form of pride.
Not only pride, but also confusion. which we must nurture. We teach them not to notice the different senses of the possessive pronoun, the finely graded differences that run all the way from my boots through my dog, my servant, my wife, my father, my master, and my country to my God. They can be taught to reduce all these senses to that of my boots, the my of ownership. Even in the nursery, a child can be taught to mean by my teddy bear, not the old imagined recipient of affection to whom it stands in a special relation, for that is what the enemy will teach them to mean if we're not careful, but the my bear I can pull to pieces if I like. And at the other end of the scale, we have taught men to say, my God, in a sense not really very different from my boots, meaning the God on whom I have a claim for my distinguished services and whom I exploit from the pulpit.
But don't they see what a joke they are? Humans can't use the word mine in its fully possessive sense about anything.
It is true, but they must never know that. In the long run, either our Father or the enemy will say mine of each thing that exists, and especially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them, whatever happens. At present, the enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it. Our Father hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest. What is this?
Under Secretary Screwtape,
Yes, French cut, you know perfectly well who I am.
you are to come with us.
Why?
Squat Weasel, the head of the secret police, would like a word with you.
About what?
Charges of heresy have been leveled against you.
Heresy? Who would dare to... Oh, Wormwood.
Uncle?
You didn't. You wouldn't.
Wouldn't do what, Uncle?
You would. You did.
Come quietly, or we'll have to use the prod.
I'm coming.
Perhaps we'll use the prod anyway.
Oh, I do hope it all works out, Uncle.
You haven't seen the last me, Wormwood.
Toadpipe,
Yes?
bring me a cup of boiling lava, will you?
Yes, sir.
And a jammy dodger.
Yes, sir.
Toadpipe, come in here.
Yes, sir?
I want you to place a call to Wormwood. I'd do it myself, but, well, my limbs haven't grown back yet from the interrogation.
Of course, sir.
Put it on the speaker gizmo and stay here in case I need anything else.
Yes, sir.
Wormwood speaking.
My dear Wormwood.
Uncle,
Yes, it is your uncle.
I'm...
Speechless, I know. You may be interested to learn that the little misunderstanding with the secret police which you tried to raise about some of my unguarded expressions has been tidied over.
I'm so glad to hear it.
If you were reckoning on your feeble attempt at treachery to secure my favor, you will find yourself mistaken.
No.
You shall pay for that, as well as for your other blunders. Meanwhile, I am sending you a little booklet just issued on the new House of Correction for incompetent tempters. It is profusely illustrated, and you will not find a dull page in it.
Thank you, sir. I look forward
Do
to...
dispatch the booklet, Toadpipe.
Oh, yes, sir.
So, dear nephew, I understand from Triptweeze that your patient is in love.
Well...
And in the worst kind he could possibly have fallen into.
Oh,
And with a girl who does not even appear in the report you sent to me.
Well, I meant to
I
add-
have looked up this girl's dossier, and I am horrified at what I find. Not only a Christian, but such a Christian, a vile, sneaking, simpering, demure, monosyllabic, mouse-like, watery, insignificant, virginal bread and butter miss. The little brute. She makes me vomit. She stinks and scalds through the very pages of the dossier. It drives me mad the way the world has worsened. We'd have had her to the arena in the old days. That's what her sort is made for. Not that she'd do much good there either. A two-faced little cheat. I know the sort. Who looks as if she'd faint at the sight of blood and then dies with a smile. A cheat in every way. Looks as if butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, and yet has a satirical wit. Filthy, insipid little prude, and yet ready to fall into this idiot's arms like any other breeding animal. Why doesn't the enemy blast her for it if he's so moonstruck by her virginity, instead of looking on there grinning? I'll tell you why. The enemy is a hedonist at heart. All those fasts and vigils and stakes and crosses are only a facade. He has a bourgeois mind, Wormwood. He has filled his world full of pleasures. There are things for humans to do all day long without his minding in the least. Sleeping, washing, eating, drinking, making love, playing, praying, working, everything has to be twisted before it's any use to us. We fight under cruel disadvantages. Nothing is naturally on our side. Not that that excuses you. I'll deal with you presently.
No, Uncle,
And you allowed your patient to get to know this woman's family and the whole circle. Unbelievable! Could you not see that the very house she lives in is one of those he never ought to have entered? The whole place reeks of that deadly odor, that impenetrable mystery that comes from the enemy. We are certain it is a matter of first principles that each member of the family must in some way be using the others. We just can't find out how. They guard as jealously as the enemy himself the secret of what really lies behind this pretense of disinterested love. The whole house and garden is one vast obscenity. It bears a sickening resemblance to the description one human writer made of heaven. The regions where there is only life, and therefore all that is not music is silence. Music and silence! How I detest them both! How thankful we should be that ever since our father entered hell, no square inch of infernal space and no moment of infernal time has been surrendered to either of those abominable forces. All has been occupied by noise. Noise! The great dynamism. The audible expression of all that is exultant, ruthless, and virile. Noise which alone defends us from silly qualms, despairing scruples, and impossible desires. We will make the whole universe a noise in the end. We have already made great strides in this direction as regards the earth. The melodies and silences of heaven will be shouted down in the end. Meanwhile, back to you. You have always hated me and been insolent when you dared, but I'll deal with you in a way you won't forget, you disgusting little...
Sir?
what was that? Uncle? Hello?
Under Secretary?
Who's that? Toadpipe? What? Are you there?
Yes, Wormwood. I will attempt to explain. It would appear that in the heat of the moment, Under-Secretary Screwtape, your uncle, has inadvertently allowed himself to assume the form of a large centipede. He wishes you to know that in his present form, he feels even more anxious to see you and to unite you to himself in an indissoluble embrace. He expects you to come immediately.
There?
Yes, immediately.
Right away.
Wormwood. Merely to improve upon your inferior education, I will explain about my transformation into a centipede. It is a periodical phenomenon. No doubt you've heard the rumor that has reached the humans, and a distorted account of it appears in the poet Milton, with the ridiculous addition that such changes of shape are a punishment imposed on us by the enemy. A more modern writer, someone with a name like Pshaw, has, however, grasped the truth. Transformation proceeds from within and is a glorious manifestation of that life force which our Father would worship if he worshipped anything but himself. I am fully recovered now, limbs and all, and look forward to renewing our teacher-pupil relationship, among other things. Insatiably yours, Screwtape.
Look, I'm as passionate about evangelism as the next Christian, Hamilton, but I simply don't understand how you think that any so-called philosophical proofs of God accomplish anything.
Don't they?
Well, in my experience, they do not draw men to God, but cause them to become atheists or agnostics.
Surely the only way to God is through faith. Faith in Jesus Christ.
What do you mean by faith, Dorothy?
A sense of the divine.
But don't all men have an innate sense of the divine? Though I suppose we may try to repress it.
Repress it how?
Well, I suppose we repress it by conflicting desires.
Or more than likely by culture and society, the current fascination with all things secular. We're all fairly comfortable and without any sense of urgency. We're not even driven by the potency of our primitive passions and desires.
Steady on, Humphrey. Mixed company and all that.
Oh, John, you are so sweet.
Thank you for noticing.
But honestly, I don't fear that this is a secular society as much as it is becoming a pagan one.
Ha! Would that were true. At least a true pagan would give Christians something to work with. Throughout history, it was the pagans who were most readily converted to Christianity.
You don't believe England's falling into paganism, then?
Well, until we see Parliament opened by the slaughtering of a garlanded bull in the House of Lords, or cabinet ministers leaving sandwiches in Hyde Park as an offering for dryads, I don't believe we need worry about paganism.
Where do you come up with...
You really have let the situation get out of hand, haven't you, Wormwood?
I don't know what happened.
It's obvious what happened. Through this girl and her disgusting family, the patient is now getting to know more Christians every day, and very intelligent Christians, too.
Too many for me to handle alone.
You're not alone. Each one has his own tempter, and we may need a council between us to assess the situation. But you can be sure that for a long time it will be quite impossible to remove spirituality from his life.
Which leaves me with what, Uncle?
Obviously, we must corrupt it. No doubt you have often practiced transforming yourself into an angel of light as a parade ground exercise.
Yes, I have.
Now is the time to do it in the face of the enemy. The world and the flesh have failed us. A third power remains: spiritual corruption. And success of this third kind is the most glorious of all. A spoiled saint, a Pharisee, an inquisitor, or a magician makes better sport in hell than a mere common tyrant or narcissist.
Well, what do you suggest?
Looking round at your patient's new friends, I find that the best point of attack would be the borderline between theology and politics. Several of his new friends are very much alive to the social implications of their religion. That in itself is a bad thing, but good can be made out of it.
How so?
You insist on being spoon-fed, don't you? Let's return to the conversation and note the views of the one who spoke a moment ago about paganism.
Look, for my money, Christianity began to go off the rails very early on.
What do you mean, off the rails?
It departed from the core teachings of Jesus. People began adding to the simplicity of what he taught, twisting it all up. Anyone who looks at the historical Jesus will see the essence of pure Christian tradition.
What did this historical Jesus teach?
It's clear from the Gospels that he was all for empowering the common man, rising up and throwing off the shackles of the rich.
So you're saying Jesus was the Karl Marx of the first century?
To put it simply, yes.
Good heavens, I never thought of it like that.
And you see, the historical Jesus, for some, is very Marxian, operating along revolutionary lines, whereas it wasn't so long ago that we constructed a historical Jesus on purely liberal and humanitarian lines. The advantages of these constructions, which we intend to change every 30 years or so, are manifold.
Are they? In what way?
In the first place, they all tend to direct men's devotions to something which does not exist. For each historical Jesus is unhistorical. The ghastly documents they call the Bible say what they say and cannot be added to.
Well, if that's the case, then how do you create new versions of the historical Jesus?
By suppressing one point of Jesus' teaching and exaggerating another. That single emphasis takes what he taught completely out of context and distorts the rest. What is left but subjective guesswork that inevitably caters to the human's own predispositions and political views?
Right.
And of course, all such constructions place the importance of their historical Jesus in some peculiar theory he is supposed to have promulgated. We thus distract men's minds from who he truly is and what he actually did.
I see. So, for example, we render him solely a good moral teacher.
And then conceal the reality that he simply couldn't have made the claims he made about himself and still be considered good or moral.
Perfect.
Our third aim with these constructions is to destroy the devotional life. We replace the real presence of the enemy, otherwise experienced by men in prayer and sacrament, with a substitute. A merely probable, remote, shadowy, and uncouth figure who spoke a strange language and died a long time ago. Such an object cannot, in fact, be worshipped. Instead of the Creator adored by its creature, you soon have merely a leader acclaimed by a follower, and finally, a distinguished character approved by a judicious historian.
Yes, I understand.
I sincerely doubt it. Fourthly, besides being unhistorical in the Jesus it depicts, religion of this kind is false to history in another sense. No nation and few individuals are really brought into the enemy's camp by the historical study of the biography of Jesus simply as biography. Indeed, materials for a full biography have been withheld from men. The earliest converts were converted by a single historical fact: the resurrection, and a single theological doctrine, the redemption, operating on a sense of sin which they already had. The Gospels came later and were not written to make Christians, but to edify Christians already made.
How do you know all this hideous rubbish?
I paid attention in class, little fool. You would do well to pay attention now. You must always encourage this historical Jesus, however dangerous he may seem to be to us at some particular point.
Right, but what does all this have to do with politics?
Politics?
You mentioned politics earlier, the general connection between politics and Christianity, didn't you?
I did. And in that, our position is more delicate. Certainly, we do not want men to allow their Christianity to flow over into their political life, for the establishment of anything like a really just society would be a major disaster. On the other hand, we do want, and very much want, to make men treat Christianity as a means, preferably, of course, as a means to their own advancement, but failing that as a means to anything, even to social justice.
Well, surely not.
I don't mean social justice as a reality. I mean, we must get a man at first to value social justice as a thing which the enemy demands, and then work him to the stage at which he values Christianity because it may produce social justice. Do you see?
No.
I'll try again. The enemy will not be used as a means to an end.
Right.
Men or nations who think they can revive the faith in order to make a good society might just as well think they can use the stairs of heaven as a shortcut to the nearest chemist's shop. Fortunately, it is quite easy to coax humans around this little corner. Only today, I have found a passage in a Christian writer where he recommends his own version of Christianity on the ground that only such a faith can outlast the death of old cultures and the birth of new civilizations. Do you see the little rift? Believe this not because it is true, but because it serves a purpose. You see, that's the game.
Yes.
Now, round up the other tempters we need to meet.
Yes, sir. Who exactly?
Let us begin with Slumtrippage. She is in charge of your patient's young woman.
Right, I'll find her.
You won't need to look far. I can see her beady little eyes in the ashes behind the fire grate. Well, Slumtrippage. Don't just stand there with your mouth hanging open. Tell us about this woman, Dorothy, is it?
Yes, sir. I believe I have found a chink in her armor, though it's only an unobtrusive little vice, which I found she shares with nearly all women who have grown up in an intelligent circle united by a clearly defined belief.
Out with it.
She seems to have a rather untroubled assumption that outsiders who do not share her and her family's belief are really simple-minded and ridiculous. It is a sort of confidence which she supposes to be due to faith, but is in reality largely due to the mere color she has taken from her surroundings.
Yes, I know the type. It's not very different from the conviction she would have felt at, say, the age of 10, that the kind of butter knives used in her father's house were the proper or normal or real kind, while those of the neighboring families were not real butter knives at all. Now, the element of ignorance and naivete in all of this is so large, and the element of spiritual pride so small that it gives us little hope of the girl herself.
I didn't say it was much.
Not for your girl, but it may show promise for Wormwood's patient.
What? Sorry, mine?
Oh, do pay attention, Wormwood. This exercise is for you, you should recall.
Yes, I know, but I'm sorry, I don't see the connection between her butter knives and bringing down my patient.
In this new circle of friends, your patient is a novice.
Right.
Every day he is encountering a quality of Christian life he never before imagined, and seeing it all through an enchanted glass because he is in love. He is anxious. Indeed, the enemy commands him to imitate this quality.
Yes.
The girl has a strong influence on him.
Right.
Can you get him to imitate this defect in her and to exaggerate it until what was venial in her becomes in him the strongest and most beautiful of all the vices? Spiritual pride.
Oh, I see now, right.
Are you finished with me, sir?
You may go, Slum Trimpet. This has not helped you, but I'll put in a good word with your supervisor for your cooperation.
Much obliged, sir.
Yes, Wormwood, this is a promising approach. Conditions seem ideally favorable. The new circle in which he finds himself is one of which he is tempted to be proud for many reasons other than its Christianity. It is a better educated, more intelligent, more agreeable society than any he has yet encountered.
Yes.
He is also under some degree of illusion as to his own place in it. Under the influence of love, he may still think himself unworthy of the girl, but he is rapidly ceasing to think of himself unworthy of the others. He does not dream how much of his conversation, how many of his opinions are recognized by them all as mere echoes of their own. Still less does he suspect how much of the delight he takes in these people is due to the erotic enchantment which the girl, for him, spreads all over her surroundings. He thinks that he likes their talk and way of life because of some congruity between their spiritual state and his, where, in fact, they are so far beyond him that if he were not in love, he would be merely puzzled and repelled by much which he now accepts.
Yes, perfect.
Here is your chance. While the enemy, by means of sexual love and of some very agreeable people far advanced in his service, is drawing the young barbarian up to levels he could never otherwise have reached, you must make him feel that he is finding his own level, that these people are his sort, and that coming among them, he has come home. When he turns from them to other society, he will find it dull, partly because almost any society within his reach is, in fact, much less entertaining, but still more because he will miss the enchantment of the young woman. You must teach him to mistake this contrast between the circle that delights and the circle that bores him for the contrast between Christians and unbelievers. He must be made to feel, though without ever putting it into words, how different we Christians are. And by we Christians, he must really, but unknowingly mean my set. And by my set, he must mean not the people who in their charity and humility have accepted me, but the people with whom I associate by right.
So I should guide him to be proud of being a Christian?
No.
No?
Success here depends on confusing him.
Right.
If you try to make him explicitly and professedly proud of being a Christian, you will probably fail. The enemy's warnings are too well known. If, on the other hand, you let the idea of we Christians drop out altogether and merely make him complacent about his set, you will produce not true spiritual pride, but mere social vanity, which, by comparison, is a puny little sin. What you want is to keep a sly self-congratulation mixing with all his thoughts and never allow him to raise the question, what precisely am I congratulating myself about? The idea of belonging to an inner ring, of being in a secret, is very sweet to him. Play on that nerve. Teach him, using the influence of this girl when she is silliest, to adopt an air of amusement when he is around unbelievers. The great thing is to make Christianity a mystery religion in which he feels himself one of the special and exclusive initiates. You're dismissed.
Dismissed, Uncle?
You know what you must do. Now go and do it.